am going to get our recording started and we will officially get off to the races here. So welcome for joining our webinar today on optimizing your onboarding strategy. We have lots to cover and content, and hopefully this will be a engaging, interactive webinar for everyone who's participating today. We have a couple of opportunities to share about your experiences as it relates to your onboarding strategy, but also lots of frameworks and content for you to think about. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and lead us into our housekeeping items for the webinar today. A few notes, as you just heard, I'm recording this, so we will send out a recap with the link to the recording so that you can listen in your spare time, go back to all of the wonderful content that we're sharing, and or share with some of your colleagues. The lines right now, we will mute, or you should be muted. If you have a question or a comment, feel free to put that in the chat. So Brian and myself will be monitoring that. And then also look out for an invite for our next office hours sessions, which should be coming out here very soon. To get us started, I want to have each of us today just do a quick introduction of ourselves so you understand our background and experiences, and specifically as it relates to this topic of building out your onboarding strategy. I see lots of familiar names and faces. I can't see your face, but I see your name and I know what you look like. But I also see lots of new faces. So I'll kick us off and then I'll hand the microphone over to Brian. My name is Kate Griffin. I'm a Vice President of Delivery Services here at nCloud Integrators. And my background is in CS. I actually, before CS, I started in higher education, moved from higher education to tech via an ed tech company, and have been focused on learning the reins of CS. Started back in the CS industry in about 2012 at an ed tech startup, and have done everything from being an individual contributor to building out a CS organizations to sitting in operations for customer success, for professional services. And now I have the wonderful opportunity to be able to consult with customers like yourselves on building out CS initiatives and practices. So really happy to be here today and be talking to you on this topic. Brian, floor is yours.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Kate. Welcome, everyone. I do recognize many of the names as well, but for those of you that don't know me, my name is Brian Hodges. I'm one of the co-founders here at nCloud Integrators. My background prior to joining nCloud or co-founding nCloud, I ran the professional services organization for a software company called Informatica. I was actually there for 20 years. Was the first consultant there, and over my 20-year tenure, we went from one consultant to over 450 around the world. And at times that included the customer success team. It included education services. So I've had a ton of experience in sales services teams and activities over the years here. And so really excited about taking what I've learned and the bumps and the bruises that I've had to hopefully help you avoid some of those, or at least make them less severe than what they might be. So I think that's enough about me. I am based in Columbus, Ohio. Outside of Columbus, Ohio, and the relevance of that is that unfortunately, over the last month or so, our carrier for my Wi-Fi service has been less than stellar. So while I wanted to have my face here for you all to see that I'm live and I'm not a GPT robot, I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera off just because I'm afraid that I'm going to get bitten by the Wi-Fi bug, and I don't want that to happen in this presentation. I'm going to turn my camera off, but rest assured I'll still be here.
All right.
Now for the agenda, as Kate said, we've got a lot of great content, and we can just build this slide out. What we're going to talk about is, first of all, the foundational need for a methodology to do an effective onboarding, some really valuable lessons that have been learned over the years on this topic. So we'll share some things there. And then we'll get into what we see as the three. We'll talk about the onboarding models themselves, and we'll talk about three of them that I've seen throughout, that Kate and I have seen through our careers. And then we'll wrap up with some Q&A and some next steps. However, again, if you do have a question that you just really want to get out there while we are on a slide, go ahead and put that in the chat, and Kate and I will try to keep an eye on it so that we can address the question live. If we do miss it, we'll come back to it when we get to the Q&A session. Great. We can go to the next slide. So I talked a little bit about who I am, and Kate described her role. Just a little bit about nCloud Integrators. As I said, before co-founding this, Chris Darius, the other co-founder, and I worked for decades in this. And as Kate said, she's been in the CS world for decades as well. And so we are, very experienced and very focused on making our customers successful, which ultimately means that it'll make your customers successful. We've been at this for about 6 years. We were co-founded in 2018. We've delivered over 500 engagements or delivered for over 500 customers in that time frame. A lot of those customers have come back to us, like many of you on the call here. So I think we've done a good job of putting focus on the trust and the partnership that we create with our customers. And I think that's demonstrated through the commitment we have at making you successful in whatever that you're trying to do. So that's who we are and some of the things that we stand for. And Kate, if we could go to the next one. And actually,
Wonderful.
I think I'm going to turn things over here to you and talk about the foundational methodology.
Yep. So we can't talk about onboarding models without talking about methodology that needs to be built. And this is really important. So yes, it's important to think about how we structure our onboarding initiatives, services, but part of that is thinking about the methodology that's going to go into it. And I want to kick us off just thinking about it's important for us to have effective onboarding. We need to think about the model. We need to think about the methodology, but why? So why is everybody here today? Why do we care about this? And there's a lot of different factors for us to consider here. The first one is around a faster time to productivity. I think of this as it could be internal and external lens on this concept of productivity. One, an effective onboarding can help our teams be productive faster. If we give them the tools and their toolbox and the content and the education and a path of how to do things, it's going to allow that team to be very productive. And hopefully guide customers to time to value milestones within implementation or within onboarding faster. So that's one thing. The second thing is also we could take that with the lens on the customer facing side of if we are really effective in how we onboard, we're also going to make hopefully our customers time to productivity faster within the product or the service that you're focused on. The second is around improving employee engagement. When we are thinking about how we're going to approach onboarding, and we're going to have this methodology and content and resources, all of that is a benefit for our team members to be able to, one, understand what they need to do, how they need to do it, and have them be more engaged in understanding of the expectations that are around what they should be doing within the onboarding process. And a lot of that's going to go into like the nuts and bolts of building a methodology as well. And if we have a very solid process and clear expectations of what to do, that also can help us reduce turnover within our teams. Probably something we don't consider when we think about effective onboarding, these internal lenses, but that can help our teams have very clear pictures about one, what's in it for them in their day-to-day, but what's in it for the customer as well, to ensure they know exactly what they need to do and the moments that they need to do it. We also can think about this from like a company culture perspective of if we have effective onboarding with our customers, we also can enhance the culture across the team of understanding, one, the path in this aspect of the customer journey, but also building bridges and communication paths from across the organization to understand one, what's happening with onboarding with our customers, and then I'm knowing everyone's role in that process. And ultimately, all of these things can go into increase customer satisfaction. If a customer is satisfied, they're achieving the things they want to achieve in onboarding and beyond, that's going to lead to that customer renewing. That's also going to lead to a path of potentially more revenue and a customer purchasing additional services or products. With that, I talked a little bit about this concept, right? That's overarching. Like, why is this important? We also know that in order to achieve those things, we have to have this foundational methodology. So, Brian, I'm going to let you go ahead and talk through just some practices around building a foundational methodology that will work for an organization.
Great. Thanks, Kate. I appreciate that. And, you know, as Kate was alluding to, there are a lot of reasons to have a foundational methodology. And we're talking specifically about onboarding here, the onboarding process. But I will tell you that in my experience and at Informatica, we had a huge number of products. We had a huge number of business lines that we were in. So not only do we have a lot of products, but we also had a lot of services offerings that needed to go with those. And as we grew and as we developed more opportunities and had more solutions to go out onto the market, it became even more and more critical for us to have methodologies that we could leverage for my consultants or my CSMs to be able to follow the steps and to be able to deliver a consistent experience. So I'll go through some details here of why, through my career, I have found this to be important. And number one is, you know, you want to have a consistent and efficient approach to everything that you're doing, whether it's an onboarding project or an upgrade project or just, you know, whatever the case might be. The other thing that's important with this is as you get good at creating and maintaining your methodology, you'll find that you can identify repeatable resources and templates. This streamlines the process by having documents that you reuse from engagement to engagement. You have checklists, you have resources in general that you can put into your consultant's hands or your CSM's hands to make the process consistent, but also make it very efficient. And that's going to save you a lot of time, and it's also going to create a consistent customer experience. If we go to the next slide or the next build here, the other thing that you'll be able to do with this is look at ways to provide your customer with education. And it's not just, you know, your standard educational videos and your educational documents. But you will discover that as you go through this, you build a methodology and then you tie in the points at which you want the client to consume that educational material. You may find that if you don't do this properly, your customers may consume the training at the wrong time of their customer life cycle, and then suddenly the material that they consumed is not relevant anymore, or they don't understand it, or they have to go back and revisit it. So part of your methodology should think about where and when and what you're providing as far as the educational material, and make the timing and the content appropriate to the solution that you're delivering. And if we can go to the next build, as you know, kind of tied into that, the other thing that you want to think about is giving them self-service access to this content. And the thing that I would really emphasize here is when you're building your methodology and you've got your product content, you're training around your product, think about things that are going wrong with your delivery model. Think about points of friction where you can create some additional how-tos for filling out a data description spreadsheet, or specific tasks that you're asking clients to do that for various reasons they get delayed on. They have trouble completing those deliverables on time. When we look at our methodology every other quarter or so, This is one of those things we zero in on, or what are we doing in our projects that are slowing things down, or where are we having difficulty in having our clients keep up with this? Think about ways to create additional self-service artifacts, training and enablement artifacts that will smooth over those points of friction and give your clients an ability to move more quickly through the engagement lifecycle. So there's a few things to keep in mind on that side. And if we can go to this next build, the other thing that in today's world, it's just critical to use automation. There are a lot of tools out there today for onboarding, project delivery, or just project management. And almost all of those tools have some form of automation available to them. This is another one of those things for your CSM or your consultant's sanity to put time and energy and focus into thinking about, can we automate this step? If you think about the amount of mental clutter that your consultants and your CSMs have to deal with every day, trying to remember every little thing they have to do, the more, as a leader of that organization, the more you can look for ways to automate those processes with the technology that you have available. It's going to help eliminate those manual tasks. It's going to reduce the chance for an error or an oversight, and it'll just speed up the process. And the other thing that I would highlight here, leverage automation for notification, pre-notification, post-notification for your client activity. There's no, clients often say they forgot about a step they were supposed to take, or they didn't remember that they were supposed to deliver a certain item. So putting a lot of automation around notifications can help reduce those points of friction in your engagements as well. If we go to the next build here, it kind of ties into it as well. Uniform customer experience. So the thing that I find when I talk to clients about helping them build out their methodology, one of the first things I'll hear is, well, our projects are so different, and it may be a single solution, but it's so different from one client to the next. I typically call baloney on that, and while it's true that there are unique things for every client, I will also say in 99% of the processes that I work on customers with, we find a significant amount of consistent activity that can be applied uniformly across the delivery lifecycle. And again, it creates a uniform experience. You're certain that the quality is going to be positive every time, and that the clients are going to get value out of this regardless of it. Now, again, I do understand there's some things you'll have to tweak and customize perhaps, but those are opportunities for you to build out within your methodology to help your teams keep up with. The next item here is to track your key metrics. Establish, when you're looking at your methodology, the other thing you want to look at is tracking and analyzing those onboarding metrics. Try to find ways to capture and timestamp. How long did it take for us to deliver time to value? How long did the onboarding phase take? How long did each phase of the project take? The more you can timestamp and track the timing metrics, the better you'll be able to enhance this as you go forward, the better analytics you'll be able to do on this. So track the time to value, track the customer satisfaction, not just at the entire onboarding, but on each phase if you can. The adoption rates, and just look for ways to drive continuous improvements. The more metrics you capture, and the more you do this with your applications as opposed to manually, the better off you'll be. So track those metrics and then look for continuous improvement. Kate, I can tell you that Kate and her team look at our methodologies at least twice a year. We do a deep dive with our team. We talk about what's working, what's not working, and we look for ways to gather feedback from our customers. We streamline it. I think our methodologies, certainly our core methodology for onboarding, is probably in its 12th or 13th iteration at this point. So I know that's a lot. I've covered a lot here, but things to think about as you're building your methodology will help you tremendously and help your teams be more effective and more efficient. If we could go to the next slide, and we'll shift now, and we'll talk about when you're doing onboarding now. There are three common models that we'll talk about. Let's just build this slide out, Kate, if we could.
Yep.
The three models that we see most common are, first of all, the all-in-one onboarding model. What we mean by that is we have a single CSM organization that does it all. They are responsible for basically every phase of their customer lifecycle when it comes to customer success. They do the onboarding, they do the renewals, they do just about everything. And so what we're talking about in the all-in-one onboarding model, it is you've got a single CSM team and they are doing everything, including the full onboarding. And so you're looking to train and resource provided to enable the sort of end-to-end customer support for the life cycle. And the second one is you have a CSM team that's responsible for a lot of things, but you may have a small subset of that team that does nothing but onboarding. And they have a tailored process that they follow. You have a dedicated number of resources. And as you bring new people in, they have, into this organization or into this team, they have very specific and targeted preparation to help them with the responsibilities they have in this space. And then the third is where you have a specific unit that may be outside of your customer success organization, and it may be called an onboarding team. It actually may be part of your professional services portfolio, but you have a team that's outside of your customer success organization that is specifically doing the onboarding activities. And so these are the three models that we're going to talk about and provide some more detail. And we'll get into a lot more detail around these bullets as we go through each model. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Kate to talk about these models.
Yeah, and what I'd love to hear from the group is which model are you in? Now, you may be in multiple of them. So we're going to go ahead. I'm going to push out a poll. Give me one moment to click the launch, and I'm going to bring this over here. So what we're curious about is what's your current onboarding approach? Are you, in one of these that we just described? Do you not have a formal model? Are you in another? We're going to go into each of these details, as Brian said, each of these models in great detail. So it would be great to see what's the breakdown of the folks that we have in the webinar today. All right, it looks like we're probably almost there of folks answering. And whoa, it's close. Actually in a split there. So looks like about 31% of you have specific roles in CS for onboarding. We've got almost an even split here with the all-in-one, so CSMs or a role doing everything. We've got some that do have a specific unit that are just for onboarding. A few of you that do not have a formal model. So this is probably going to be a wonderful content for you to figure out which one would work for you. And then we have a few folks that are other. So when we break towards the end, I'd love to hear from these folks here that were in this other model of, is it multiple of these? Is it something different that we don't have here? Feel free to put that in the chat if you want, and we can come back to that if you're willing to share. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end our poll. And we're going to first dig into this concept of an all-in-one approach. And in my first role in CS, as I said, right, kind of fell into customer success from higher education. And so I had an education background, and that just is a great alignment to building out methodology and how we educate customers. But it's, the other aspect of that is thinking about how do we do that internally? How do we set our teams up for success? Thinking about their workloads and balancing and what content we need to provide for them. And so in that first experience, organization was definitely more towards, a mature startup, I'll say. And CSMs were responsible for everything. So when I started that organization, I had a new customer sign, I would do their onboarding, I would be with them through renewal. And it's really interesting to hear when we work with customers of where they're at with this, because I think there's different perspectives in the industry of, the benefits of this and what are the negative sides. And that's really what we're going to break down here. So the all-in-one model is you might have CSMs that are responsible for everything. So that example that I shared when I started at my first tech company, we did everything for the customer, probably a little bit too much that we should have been doing at the time. And how I'll start off first is one of the key considerations you should make if you're thinking about, is this something that we should focus on? Should we have an all-in-one model? The first thing to think about are CSM schedules. I had a lot to juggle. I would go from training a customer on a specific aspect of the product to having an escalation to building out outcomes plan for them. It was everything in the kitchen sink. And so what's important to think about in the all-in-one model are your team's time and how they're spending their time, because they're going to be doing a lot of different things. So how do you coordinate their schedules or give them guidance of where they should be spending their time and how much of it? And that really breaks down to my next two bullets here, which is establishing a daily routine of, if they have customers that are in onboarding, how do they spend or structure their time around onboarding activities? And then how much time should they be spending on a weekly basis? And as much as you can, try to monitor that. And I think that this is really hard because if you're not monitoring that, the loudest thing in the CSM's portfolio, whether that be customers that are past onboarding or customers that are onboarding, whatever is louder is what you're going to hear about the most, or what they probably have the most stress of. So if you're expecting them to be 50-50, 50% of your time should be spent on customers that are adopting and renewing, 50% of your time is on onboarding, but the team is spending all of their time in onboarding, what's happening to those other customers, which is why establishing like, what is a typical day? Should a typical day look like if you got this all in one model? And what are the expectations around where you're spending your time? And identify where they can go for help and have resources for them. So Brian talked about this in establishing the methodology. I talked a little bit in the why of like employee and engagement and having them, committed to these roles. We need somewhere for them to go and get help, and probably something you could scale here if you have an education portal where they can go and pull already predetermined resources. Or is there a Slack channel where they can go and quickly get technical questions answered? Whatever it may be, whatever level of sophistication that be, we really want to at least tell them where they go. Don't let them figure that out on their own, because that's another time suck that could be in their day-to-day or their weekly work experiences. And then monitor activities. So it's really important here that we still are understanding the success and the risk as it relates to the onboarding project going to do that. So what is the process if there is an escalation or there is a risk, and who gets involved for those? So just like we do in our CS framework, we just need a layer of that for onboarding, as well as how healthy is the onboarding project. Many of you, I'm sure, know like how important it is to get the customer to value quickly. And this is their first experience with you as an organization. So we want it to go well. So while we're having one person do it all, that doesn't mean we don't have different things we're monitoring. To go back to what Brian said, we want these key metrics and frameworks in place to monitor with the expectations and alignment of, how do you do this? How do you spend your time? All right, so what are the cons of the all-in-one model? And we're going to follow this framework for each of these models because there's pros and cons to all of them. And the biggest one that I have here, and the one I think some of you, on the phone I've talked to you about, and maybe you've talked about, is when you've got one person doing everything, you're going to have this risk of burnout because they are flexing so many different muscles and skills and having to shift from one thing to another. And again, it's that loudest customer or the loudest activity in their day to day that's going to take over and consume their day to day. And if you don't have the resources there to help them get to resolution quickly, even more so are they going to feel stressed. So it's definitely a consideration, right? Um, maybe you are, and I noticed I skipped over my pros. I'm going to come back to them. So my cons I wanted to start with first. Because I think these are kind of like the elephants in the room, right? That burnout is really important. But the second thing is that we're limiting the specialization. You could be switching back and forth quite a bit, and it's hard to find a unicorn, right? It is a unicorn to find somebody who can get that deep and technical in the product, can build relationships, could renew customers. And that's often also where you might see retention of employees or engagement kind of waver, or them feeling burned out because they're trying to do things that really isn't in a direct alignment to their skill set. You also could start to experience these elongated onboardings due to the fact that they're just trying to get the things done in their day to day. And so they might let some, things drop, but that can impact your timelines for wanting to get the customer. You want the customer to be live in 45 days and onboarded, but because of the CSMs, the amount of work that they have to focus on, they may let those timelines extend because that's what they need to do. That's how they feel like they need to focus their time, especially if we haven't set expectations. And so sometimes it can feel like almost like your work is in molasses and you can't unstick yourself to move yourself forward. So you feel this like lack of forward momentum of, I want customers to have this good experience. I want them to be up and running a certain time frame. These are my metrics. But because there's so much in here that it's hard. All right, let me go back to pros. What are some of the pros in this model? And one, it's simplified structure. So there's no multiple cooks in the kitchen. It's one-stop shop. It's, some would say, a benefit for the customer because they only have this, they have this one wonderful person that can do many things for them, and they know who to go to. They don't have this, grid of people, go here for here, go to this for if you have this type of question. So from a customer experience, it simplifies it. But also, even from a management, it's just one team that I have to manage, but it's maybe layered expectations. You've got this direct accountability for the CSM. They own it. They are responsible for achieving the certain things. It's on them. Some people like that. They don't like to, release control to others to manage other aspects. They might want to be able to focus on what they can control within their portfolio. As I said, it's consistent customer contact. So they've got Kate Griffin, they work with Kate for everything. There's no complication or layers there. So it's really important, right, to be thinking about the two sides of this coin, the pros of the all-in-one model, as well as the cons that can go into this, and thinking through where you're at with that. In that statement, you all may be saying, yes, we're in this all-in-one model, but Kate, we're feeling all of that fire right from the cons slide. And we really need to think about what else we could do. And this is typically where you're at the point of thinking of, how do I scale onboarding? We need something different. It's not working. At this point, we've grown so big. The CSMs can't handle the amount of onboarding work that they have. So we need to consider what's next. And typically what you see here are things that would be indicators that you need to evaluate a different model for onboarding. Team is overwhelmed. And we saw that on the con slide. you've got a unique skill set. Maybe it worked at your initial product, but you just now acquired two different products in your organization, or now you have another release on a different aspect. You need a whole nother skill set that this team just isn't going to be able to handle, knowing everything else they need to do. You may be experiencing negative time to values, those elongated time frames. So you're not hitting the benchmarks that you have, and maybe that's a KPI for your organization. So if you're not hitting that, what could you change? It may be changing the way and the model that you approach for onboarding. And your company may be growing really quickly. So it's just too much for an all-in-one model. That's typically where you would start to say, all right, we're going to evaluate, this is not working. And this happened at the organization I was with. We did the all-in-one model for a while till it got to the point where the team was very overwhelmed. Our onboarding experience wasn't necessarily what we wanted it to be. We weren't hitting our KPIs. So then we ended up doing this shift, evaluating skill sets across the team, and actually took our team and allocated folks that would just do training and onboarding, and then folks who would focus on more of the post onboarding CS adoption, or that aspect of the customer lifecycle. So this next model is defining these specific roles. And when you get to this point, what are things that you want to consider? One, you don't want to do this with just one person. You need some sort of redundancy. So our team was very big. We actually had lots of people who shift over to more of that training onboarding team. And then we had lots of people that were just in this adoption consultant role, which is what we called them. But it won't work with one person. That person is going to get sick. That person is going to want to go on vacation. You need some sort of redundancy. So you at least need two people. If that's anything you take away from this model, it's that. And then you also need to establish clear expectations. What is the onboarding team and folks who are focused on this versus folks who are focused just on the post-onboarding customer lifecycle experience? What are the expectations and how do these two teams work together? So where before, one of the pros is you've got this one-stop shop, this one person. Now you've got two people, so you've got this specialization. But as I have in my third bullet, you want this cohesion still. So how will you build a culture to ensure that there is still collaboration? You don't want the finger pointing to start. You don't want the, hey, that's not my job. It's more of how do we work together? So we did lots and lots of conversations around, with the teams included, of how do we build out processes and procedures and the customer experience that will make it seamless. And when it's not seamless, that we have protocols in place to help mitigate. And then we're also thinking about, if we do have somebody who starts working with a customer, obviously that's going to be in the beginning of the customer life cycle. And then you're going to have a CSM come in at some point. But there is this question on this table for you to consider: is when does that CSM get involved? Do they get introduced from the beginning? So there's always this constant swim lane, and maybe there's certain responsibilities the CSM does throughout onboarding, and then officially they're the main point of contact which onboarding is done? Or is it's the onboarding team or the onboarding individual, and then eventually there is a formal handoff and CSM gets introduced? So something to consider of how that looks. I've personally done it two different ways. I've experienced it in different ways. I think there's pros and cons just for that bullet point. The pros of specific roles in CS onboarding is, one, we now have a distribution of responsibilities. We've taken everything that was in one jar, we split it into two jars. We now can have a specialization. So I maybe always spent a lot of time in onboarding, and I loved educating customers and getting them up and running. Well, now I get to do that all day long. I have these core responsibilities that are tied to that. It's also allowing us to enhance the focus on customer success. So before, I might have been so bogged down and just trying to get customers to, go live within so many days or to meet a certain milestone that it was too much for an individual. It was too much for maybe even as a manager to really break that apart to understand like what is this customer experience, right? You're just so in the trenches of getting things done. But it allows you to take the step back and really think thoughtfully about the customer journey of the activities that happen in onboarding, activities that should happen in adoption. And hopefully, you'll have some time to think about that reduced time to value. And that if you're thinking about that experience and thoughtfully about it, that you have more processes and procedures in place to know like who's focused on what, we need to hit this certain KPI, and that you're going to hopefully see results that are reduced TTV metrics. And then really just simplicity around the management overall of, what could have been a lot of complexities within the day-to-day. You've while you were adding two different teams, and there's definitely, as we saw in the cons, things we need to consider between how those teams work together. As long as you're building that cohesion, right, we should see some success there. Too many cooks in the kitchen. I talked about this as a con a little bit, that, potentially you could have overlap, especially if you had team members who were used to doing it all in one. It may be harder for them to move away from splitting things out. And it's something to consider of having really, really clear documentation of who's doing what and when are they doing it. You also could have increased process complexity. So before it was one person and here's what you do. Now you've got multiple people. You may have multiple different processes for different types of or aspects of onboarding or their customer experience that can add complexity. So it's really balancing, right? You don't want to, if there was an issue or you were experiencing some negativity with the all-in-one model, making sure you don't repeat those when you move into this concept of having specific roles. And with that, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Brian, because if you get to this point and you say, okay, we've shifted, we now have specific rules, there may be indicators that actually there's one more step for you to go to. There's one more model you might want to consider, especially as you continue to grow. So Brian, I'll hand the microphone over to you.
Great. Thanks, Kate. So the thing that's happened from my perspective, I've seen a ton of customers come with questions around how do we find a way to prove the value of either our CS organization or if it's a professional services team, how do we get better at driving revenue and driving margin for our company? So I kind of went straight to the heart there with the bullet point there that talks about revenue opportunity. But one of the biggest indicators for scale and one of the biggest drivers for a lot of SaaS companies these days, they've got to find a way to make money. They've got to find a way to monetize what used to be free. They've got to now find a way to monetize because their leadership team is putting pressure now to find ways to increase the revenue for the company beyond the revenue the CS team may already be driving with renewals, upsell, cross-sell, or even churn reduction. There's this push now for getting dollars and cents in the door for the activity that you deliver day in and day out. So that's one, and I just kind of went straight to that one. But there are other reasons that you would scale as well. If you need further types of services for your customers that tie into or are part of the onboarding or are very adjacent to the onboarding process, or if you have tons of variations. I'd mentioned, in my tenure at Informatica, I think we did 16 acquisitions where we brought 16 new products through companies that were already on the market. And it got to the point where you just there was no such thing as a technology unicorn across all of those products. So it became really important to successfully drive those onboarding engagements, to have someone that knew that product, that knew that space, that had the intimate knowledge of what was needed for that solution. And some were more technical than others. And so you just really had to have the right resource. So if you've got a unique segment, you've got a unique product, that's an indicator, yeah, we need to scale this to its own unit, or even perhaps to the professional services organization. I've already highlighted the revenue. And then the other thing is, if you are starting to involve the partner community for delivering onboarding activity, for delivering the onboarding at whole, that's also an indicator that you probably want to have a unit dedicated to it, because that partner is going to run plays for onboarding. And in order to make sure that they're doing a good job, and in order to have them integrate with your team, you're going to want to have a dedicated unit for managing that and delivering those services as well. So those are indicators for scale. And if we can go to the next slide here. So the specific unit, and it's funny that it's not funny, but we're using the term, the word unit. It may not be a professional services team. It may be a subset or a unit within your professional services team, or it may be a unit with your customer support team that does, onboarding. So we're calling it a specific unit, but it's basically a team that's got a separated P&L, or maybe not maybe not its own P&L, but they've got very specific ways to track dollars in, dollars out, people in, people out, steps in, steps out. So very specific unit for doing the onboarding. And key considerations here, again, defined customer engagement models across the customer journey. So this is something that Kate talked about. When you have a specific onboarding unit, there are inputs and outputs, and you have to make sure that you've got a very clear model that's understood across all the stakeholders within your company. What steps are going to need to be done before the onboarding? What steps are going to need to be done after the onboarding? And it's really critical. I can't tell you how many times I go into a client where they've asked for help with improving their overall customer experience. And I'll just do interviews and ask about the inputs and the outputs from the different teams. And it's just amazing to me how often there's not clarity on that. And it's not a difficult thing to do. It just takes time and energy and focus. So define the engagement model across the customer journey, know who's responsible for what and when, and make sure that that's understood by everyone. And that will help with clearing the roles and the responsibilities. Making sure that each team member knows not only what they're supposed to be responsible for, but then having some understanding of what the team before them was doing and what the team after them is supposed to do. It'll help them be more effective in their role. That comes down to, and what drives a lot of that effectiveness is a handoff process. If it's applicable, if you have a onboarding team, chances are there's a sales process that happened before that. Make sure there's a clear handoff process between the sales organization and the onboarding organization. As a leader of a consulting practice, what drives me crazy, what's driven me crazy in my career, is when I have a consultant that will get on a call and a kickoff call for an onboarding engagement and ask the client what their goals are or what they're looking to do for them. Or asking things that the client has spent months providing during the pre-sale process. So there really has to be an effective handoff before the onboarding starts, and then, equally important, after the onboarding is completed and this is getting transitioned to your CS team or your support team, making sure that there's a handoff after the onboarding is done. And again, the silo building that I see has to come to an end if you want to be successful in creating a seamless client experience. You've got to make sure there's communication across the organization, from the sales team to the onboarding team, the professional service team, customer success team. You've got to make sure that you are all on the same page, so that your clients don't feel like they're lost in the customer lifecycle. We can go to the next slide. As far as the pros, so I've touched on a few of these already, but again, specialized focus on onboarding, especially if you're going to charge. So this is what you want to think about when it comes to looking at driving revenue and charging customers. You have to find ways to add value and additional value than what you may have done in the past. And oftentimes that takes specialized focus on the onboarding process. What's the thing that we're going to do above and beyond what we did before? How can we improve the experience with an aligned set of skills? Great communication skills, great technical skills, great focus. Those things are all going to be needed, and that's a pro for this model. Specialized offerings. You may have unique offerings for each type of onboarding that you're doing. And so when you're charging for or looking to drive revenue from this team, these kinds of things are really important. And then finally, you will have clear financials. You'll have clear inputs and outputs on what are we spending on this team and what are we generating from this team. So you have clear financials as a pro. You can defend this team by having those clear financials. We go to the cons. The cons are fairly significant. Obviously, when you're doing this, it's going to be an initial cost and a lot of initial effort that's going to need to take place. This robust coordination is going to be needed because of the complexity this will create within the customer lifecycle. So you've got to put more emphasis on that. The streamlining that takes place and making sure that you're educating your customers. In fact, you have to over-educate your customers on who is going to be responsible for what and for when. It's got to be clear and consistent and almost nonstop communication. And then the other thing to think about here is personal transitions and management and different expectations. If you have a situation where you've moved this to PS or you've moved it to an onboarding team, some CSMs don't want to do a consulting job. Some CSMs don't want to move to a dedicated role for doing onboarding only. Others really want to do it, but they may not be ready or may not be capable. So as you're putting this together, you've got to think about your team, where they are today, and start preparing for those conversations around how to put people into these roles and how to prepare people for these roles as a future opportunity for them. If we go to the next slide here, indicators for scale on this. So you think about indicators for scale. The number one thing that I think about is there a bigger revenue opportunity? Is there a way for us to generate more revenue for our company? And that's maybe driven by organizational growth, product growth. There may be more and more onboardings that we're needing to do because our product is expanding or our sales team is doing a great job. And the other thing to think about is as your team works on onboarding and as you have this methodology, you're going to find they're going to come to you with ideas. Man, we could really do more if we offered this additional service, if we had a managed service, if we have expert service, if we have other things that we can do. If there's other services that you can tack onto or build out of your onboarding, those are things to think about. Building a full PS organization to sell those services and drive revenue, but also value for your clients. If we go to the next slide. I know we're almost out of time here, so we're going to jump quickly into Q&A and do a little bit of summary. So before we get to the summary, we'll just pause for a moment and see if there are any questions on what we've covered so far. I know I went a little bit fast there trying to make sure that I got through all the content. Any questions on the stuff that we've covered so far?
I don't think you see anything come through the chats yet.
Okay. All right. Well, I know this is a lot and it's been very fast paced. So what we'll do is I've got a summary slide. What I like to do is see if there are questions and then give you some final thoughts to walk away with before you go back to your day job here. So let's talk summary considerations and just go ahead and build this out, Kate, if you would, please. So, I hope that at the beginning, you were able to catch on to the importance of this foundational methodology for all your services offerings. It doesn't have to be overwhelming, but it should be something that's repeatable and something that your team can follow and something that creates efficiency. The other thing we talked about is track the metrics at whatever level you are capable. If you're just getting into this, if you got a small team, if you don't have a lot of ways to automate your time stamping and that, then just try to find a way to gather whatever metrics you can, because in order to expand and grow and understand when you need to make a move and defend it or make the case to your leadership team, the data is going to help tell that story for you. And so you're going to want to track the level so that you can leverage your data in the decision-making process. You don't want these decisions to come down to an emotional discussion. You want to have the facts and the data to support you. So track the metrics at whatever level you can so that you can use data to drive your decision-making process. And then with that, you can provide clarity for the swim lanes, regardless of the model you choose. Make sure you're providing that clarity, not only to your team, but to the stakeholders within your company, as well as your customers. It's really important to constantly communicate who's responsible for what and when throughout the customer lifecycle. When you are making this change, you can't do it in a vacuum. Change management has got to be part of every model transition. If you move from an all-in-one to a dedicated team, and then if you move from a dedicated team to a move to PS or an onboarding organization, there's got to be change management. You've got to think about that as part of the process, not as an afterthought. So that's really important. Create customer value with every step and with every service you provide. Do it early and do it often and remind the customers about it. And when you're doing that, when you're providing value to your customers, it doesn't have to be free. And it shouldn't be free no matter what the sales organization says or no matter what friction or pushback you're getting. As a customer success or professional services leader, your teams are providing value to your customers. And that value does not need to be free. So hopefully this was helpful. I'm going to go ahead and Kate have the next slide. Here's some resources beyond what we've covered here today. We've got some links for some other webinars that Kate and other members of the team have delivered. I've done a few things from a professional service perspective with the TSIA, as well as some other things that I've delivered here talking about how to make professional services more profitable. So check those resources out. And as always, feel free to follow up with us in separate emails. Got our contact information here. Thank you for your time and for being a part of this today. And many of you are our customers. And so most importantly, thank you for being customers for us here at nCloud Integrators. I appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.